So the question I started with tonight is, are we currently in a domestic homegrown color revolution? Well, I want to go back to this first chalkboard because it frames out how our own government facilitated regime change all over the world. There's a government, ultimately at the top. Support is given through organizations like USAID, the State Department, or somewhere else within the administration. Then you have a degree of separation. It's privatized. NGOs, the National Endowment for Democracy, National Democratic Institute, International Republican, all of these things. Then there's the money, the people with the real money, and that's people like George Soros through his Open Society, and Tides. We should do a show again on Tides, or just look it up on YouTube. You'll find an old show of mine on Tides. And even government-funded NGOs like Ned, again, over here. The money this time is coming from you. Excuse me. Finally, the demonstrators, the youth movements, the people who hit the streets, and a sympathetic media that will help deliver their message. I'm going to add labor unions in here because they are contributing to the organizing of these protests, this grassroots. Okay, so this is how revolutions are set up. But what are the conditions for one to be successfully conducted? When can regime change actually be attempted? Well, State Department learned this by doing it over and over and over again. And we know it because Obama's ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, literally wrote the book on it. Eden Pure is having their famous buy one, get one deal on the thunderstorm air purifiers. No matter how many thunderstorms you buy, you'll get an equal amount for free. There's nothing worse than having odors in your house. Have you ever walked into somebody's house and you're like, oh, wow, you either have a cat or a teenager. Thankfully, you can get rid of any bad smell now when you get the Eden Pure Thunderstorm Air Purifier. Whether it's odor from cooking, cigarettes, litter box, trash cans, or teenagers, it doesn't matter. Thunderstorm will knock it out. It starts working in seconds to clear a room of smells, and you don't ever have to replace a filter. And it doesn't cover the odors. It actually purifies the air. They've sold hundreds of thousands of Thunderstorm units so far, and they have thousands of 5-star reviews online. I want you to go right now to EdenPureDeals.com and use the discount code BECKBOGO. This is what was required, as per Obama's administration, to topple a country. Are you ready? You need a semi-automatic regime. Not fully autocratic. It has to be semi. You have to have an unpopular incumbent. You have to have a united and organized opposition. Do we have these things yet? Then you have to have the ability to quickly drive home the point that the voting results were falsified. You need the media to inform people about the falsified vote. You need an opposition capable of mobilizing thousands of demonstrators. And then you need divisions among the regimes, coercive forces like the military or the police. Sounds like we have all of those, doesn't it? See, this is why all of this always moves in concert with a national election. Have you ever noticed the last, 8, 12 years, every major protest movement we have seems to kind of magically have this 4-year hibernation cycle. What a coincidence. I don't want to believe this about my country, but I believe it is true, and I believe it is coming. I believe we all need to pray for our republic and be very aware. I first saw signs that we were in a color revolution back in 2020, a group called Fight Back Table. It teamed up with a few other organizations to form something called the Transition Integrity Project. Well, we looked into it. It didn't seem like they were really doing a peaceful transition thing. They produced this document. which was the findings of the election night war game that analyzed what would happen if Donald Trump were to beat Biden. This thing is nuts. Again, it's at gb.com, glennbeck.com. Make sure you look at it, read it, please. It involved everything from unleashing waves of demonstrators on American streets to actually using the threat of secession to force concessions from Donald Trump. One source told the Daily Beast Fight Back Table's mission and what it was all about: occupy stuff, hold space, and shut things down, not just on election day, but for weeks. Now, maybe it's just me, but that kind of sounds like a color revolution. Well, that was then. So where do they all go? Well, the head of Fight Back Table was a woman named Deidre Schiffling. Want to take a guess what job she took next? She now works at the White House. She's one of the organizers that formed Fight Back Table. She's at the White House. The other one is now at a leftist think tank called Demos. Wait a minute. Didn't we talk about this before? We've seen them. Oh, I remember. It was in an expose recently that came out on how the Biden administration was working directly with them to influence the next election. So the radicals that were wargaming 2020 went directly to work with the White House and in the White House. Now, can you turn the lights back up for the chalkboards here? I mean, looking at our chalkboard of the players involved in conducting a revolution, well, we're one for one. So let's scoot over to the other chalkboard now for a second. We're not a fully autocratic regime, and that's not what you need. You need a semi-autocratic regime. They believe Trump is Hitler, and they've told half the country believes that he is Hitler. They've got a fully united opposition. They're prepared to drive home, the point that the election was illegitimate. Hillary Clinton has been saying that just about every week since 2016. Listen to the media. They're already planting the seeds again. But what about number 5? Enough independent media that will be on their side. Well, we already know the media. I mean, it sucks. It's never been more biased, but lately it has gotten so insane that even their own employees are saying something weird, especially government employees. A 25-year veteran of NPR recently accused the outlet of injecting bias into their reporting and crushing dissent within the company. And he specifically called out their CEO, Catherine Maher. Well, before NPR, where was she? Well, she was the CEO of the Wikimedia Foundation. Now, I'm not accusing her of anything here, but if her goal was to influence public opinion and inject bias, leading both Wikipedia and NPR are pretty good spots to be at, right? But this gets a little more interesting. Chris Rufo has just pointed out in his investigation that Maher has, shall we say, an interesting work history. Before NPR, she was employed at the U.S. State Department. And before that, the National Democratic Institute. As I showed you earlier, NDI is one of the main branches of the National Endowment for Democracy, NED. And when she was there, again, you'll never guess, when she was there, what happened? The Arab Spring. And remember what the NED and the U.S. government strategy did during the Arab Spring. What was their strategy? Their strategy was training youth movements on how to influence public opinion through mass media and ultimately to organize in the streets. Oh, and then topple the regime. Chris Rufo found tweets from one of Maher's contacts in northern Africa where he all but calls her a CIA agent. And he made that claim in 2016. He also pointed out how Wikimedia was changing, and not in a good way. If you look at the history here, it is really hard to miss. He also found some of Maher's now deleted blog posts, where she talked about how seizing control of radio could be a way to govern a country. She said, quote, "Control over the flow of information in a closed society can be tantamount to control over the state." That's coming at you from the former head of Wikipedia and the current head of National Public Radio. Now, it might be nothing, right? But the sudden narrative switch from Wikipedia, did you read the story on it today? How they changed all of the stuff when they went after, I think it was Alito that had the flag, and they just changed it overnight. All of a sudden, all the history of the Appeal to Heaven flag changed overnight. And then NPR and the NED connection during a time when color revolutions were kicking off all over the world. I mean, it's peculiar at the very least. As I said a minute ago, I don't want to believe any of this stuff. But is there any other connection to the National Endowment for Democracy and anything else happening here in the United States? Well, if you just asked that question, I'm glad you did. We found out a few months ago that the NED, with cash directly from the State Department, was funding a group that was trying to censor Americans for disinformation. The Blaze was actually one of the sites that showed up on their blacklist. One of the main topics they were trying to censor was alleged voter fraud during the 2020 presidential election. They didn't want the right to be saying that. It has to be new and fresh. I mean, who needs to know if, the elections are fair, right? We did some more digging into NED financing that went to groups operating inside the United States. We found a grant from 2017 for over $75,000 to the Tides Foundation. Now, it says for supporting civil society engagement in Latin America, and it may be, but the entire reason you give to the Tides Foundation is to make the money go dark. You say it's for one thing, and then you're like, yeah, but I don't really want to. And that's what they do. Now, I have a feeling Ned knows this. It's just a hunch. Back to the chalkboard. We've got government involvement at the top. We've got signs of private NGOs like the National Endowment for Democracy. We have financiers, Soros, Tides, also through the government, through Ned. We're 3 for 3 here. But what about organizing demonstrations and the ability to pop up on the streets at a moment's notice? Well, we already talked about how the encampments are now branching out away from college campuses. Labor unions have been helping. SEIU issued a statement to universities to support the protesters. It all but sounded like a direct threat. And 2 months ago, SEIU announced its, quote, largest investment ever. They committed $200 million to, quote, mobilize working class voters to back President Biden and other Democrats. And the final piece on the chalkboard, 4 for 4, media. Oh, that's weird.